We close on Friday, and the new owners want you out by noon. I'd start packing if I were you, Dad. I'm not paying for a moving truck on top of everything else. My daughter said it the way you'd tell a contractor the dumpster was in the wrong spot. Then the line went dead. I was standing on the dock with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand. The lake flat as poured glass in front of me. And for a second, the only sound was a loon out past the point and my own heartbeat slamming against my ribs. She thought she'd won. She thought the $5.4 million sitting in her account was hers free and clear, and that her old man would shuffle off to some apartment in town and be grateful for the leftovers. She hung up before I could say a word, which was fine. Because if she'd stayed on the line, she would have heard me laugh, and she would have wanted to know why. She forgot to read the deed. Before I tell you how it took the proudest day of her life and turned it into the worst one, do me a favor. If you've ever given everything you had to people who decided your love had an expiration date, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every one of them. And if you believe a parent's trust is something you earn and not something you're owed, give this a like so more folks like us find it. My name is Abel Hargrove. I'm 68 years old, and until that Thursday morning, I believed I had raised a good woman. I built half of Tamarack with these hands. Started as a framer at 17, bought my first lot at 26, and by the time I was 50, I'd put up most of the lakefront homes on the south shore of Wolfback Lake. I know land the way some men know horses. I know what's under it and what's recorded against it, and how every promise a person makes about a piece of ground eventually gets tested by a piece of paper. That knowledge is the whole story, so hold on to it. The lodge I built for myself sat on 4 acres at the end of Cedar Spick Road, where the lake narrows and the mountains come down close enough that the morning fog hangs in the trees till 9. Log and river stone, a wraparound porch. My wife and I screened in ourselves the summer our daughter turned 8. I taught that girl to swim off the end of that dock. Held her under the belly while she kicked and screamed and then let go, and watched her figure out she could float. My wife, Adela, used to sit in a green Adirondack chair with a paperback she never finished, because she was too busy watching us. Adela passed 12 years ago. Pancreatic, 11 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral. And I have never in my life felt so useless as I did watching that disease take a woman I couldn't build my way out of losing. It was during those 11 weeks that I made the decision that set all of this in motion. I was sitting up with her one night when she couldn't sleep, and she got it in her head that she was worried about the lodge, about what would happen to it, about probate and taxes and lawyers carving pieces off the only thing besides our daughter that the two of us had ever made together. Promise me she'll have it, Adela said. Promise me it stays in the family and nobody outside ever touches it. So I promised. And being the kind of man who doesn't make a promise he hasn't already figured out how to keep, the week after the funeral I drove in the town and sat down with the only person I trusted to do it right. My attorney. A sharp, careful man named Maitland, who'd handled my closings for 30 years and never once let me sign something I'd regret. Here is what most people don't understand about giving property away. There's a difference between handing somebody a deed and handing somebody a deed with conditions baked into it. You can transfer a house to your kid so it skips the worst of the estate mess later, and you can write that transfer so that it only holds as long as certain things stay true. Lawyers have a name for it. A fee simple, determinable, with what's called a possibility of reverter. Plain English, I'll give it to you, but the second you break the deal, it snaps right back to me. Automatically. No court date. No judge. The land itself remembers who it belongs to. Maitland drafted it, and I read every line twice. The lodge would go to my daughter. But the deed said, in language I made him keep nice and clear, that her title held good only so long as her father was permitted to live on the property for the rest of his natural life. If the property were ever sold out from under me, or if I were removed from it against my will, title to the land and every improvement on it would revert, instantly and by operation of law, to me or to a small holding entity I'd set up years before called Ridgeline. I recorded it at the county the same afternoon. Then I drove home and told my daughter the lodge was hers. She cried. She hugged me on that screened porch and told me nothing would ever change, that this would always be my home, that she'd take care of me the way I took care of her mother. I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. For about 10 years, it was even true. She married a man. I'll just call him my son-in-law, because he never earned anything more specific from me, who I had my doubts about from the rehearsal dinner on. Slick, the kind who shakes your hand and looks over your shoulder to see if somebody more important just walked in. He sold something complicated, financial products. The kind of thing that's always either about to make a fortune or just lost one. For a while, the fortunes seemed real. Big trucks, a boat at the lake they never bothered to learn to drive, a kitchen remodel in their place across town that cost more than I'd paid to frame 3 houses. Then the money got quiet. You learned to read it. The visits got shorter and the asks got longer. A loan here, a favor there. Could Dad co-sign? Could Dad just help out this 1/4? I wrote checks. I'll admit I shouldn't have. Because that's what you do, you tell yourself. That's what family is. My daughter stopped calling unless there was a number attached to the conversation. The grandson I used to take out on the water at dawn got older and busier, and I saw him on holidays if I was lucky. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself when the money came back, my daughter would come back too. I was a fool. And I knew I was a fool, and I kept doing it anyway because the alternative was admitting that the little girl I'd taught to float had grown into someone who only swam toward me when she was drowning. Which brings us back to that Thursday morning. The cold coffee. The dead phone. The loon, I'll pass the point. I want you to understand I didn't panic. That surprised me too. I stood on my dock and I felt the fear come up. And then right behind it, like the second swell after a boat passes, came something colder and steadier. Because the thing my daughter didn't know, the thing she'd never bothered to learn, was that you cannot sell what you do not own. And the moment she signed papers selling my home and ordered me off the property, the deed I'd recorded 12 years earlier was going to wake up like a dog that had been sleeping by the door the whole time. But I needed to be sure. 12 years is a long time, and the law has a way of growing barnacles. So I dried off my hands, got in my truck, and drove the 40 minutes into Tamarack to see the only man who could tell me whether the trap I'd set was still loaded. Maitland was older now, mostly retired, but he still kept an office above the hardware store, and still remembered every deal we'd ever done. I laid it out for him. The phone call. The Friday closing. The buyers. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just got up, went to a gray filing cabinet that probably hadn't been opened in a decade, and pulled a folder so old the label had gone yellow. He read it. Then he took off his glasses and looked at me, and there was something in his face that I can only describe as the look a man gets when he's about to enjoy his work. "Abel," he said, "do they know about the reverter?" "I never told her," I said. "I told her the lodge was hers. I figured the day she had to learn the difference, I'd want it to be a surprise." He almost smiled. "Whoever's buying this property, their title company is going to run a search. If they do it right, they'll find this, and the deal dies on the table before it ever closes. If they do it wrong, or if your daughter pushed this through some quick cash outfit that cuts corners, then she sells them a house she doesn't own. Then," Maitland said, sliding the folder across the desk, "she commits fraud, and the buyer comes after her for every dollar of it. And you, my friend, never have to lift a finger." He told me to do nothing rash, to let it play out, to gather what I had and let the paper do the work it had been written to do. He prepared an affidavit of reverter, a formal notice that title had snapped back to Ridgeline, and the instant my daughter completed the sale and put me out, we'd record it at the county and lay it down on the table like a winning hand. I drove home the long way, along the Ridge Road, and I'll tell you the truth. I felt sick. Not scared. Sick. Because part of me was still hoping. Still half believing my daughter would call back and say she'd lost her mind, that she'd been pushed into it, that she was sorry. I gave her until dark. She didn't call. So that night I started to pack. I didn't fight it. That's the part people get wrong about how I handled this. They expect a man to stand in the doorway and rage. But I knew something they didn't. And a man who knows he's holding the winning card doesn't slam his fist on the table. He folds his clothes nice and slow and lets the other players keep betting. I packed 3 boxes. Photographs, mostly. The flag from Adela's casket. The carved wooden loon my grandson made me in shop class back when he still liked me. I left the furniture, the dishes, the green Adirondack chair where my wife used to read. I wanted them to think I'd walked away beaten. I wanted there to be no doubt later about whether I'd been removed against my will, because that was the trigger. That was the whole switch, and I needed it pulled clean. Friday at 11, my son-in-law showed up in a leased SUV with 2 guys from a moving company and a clipboard, like he was repossessing a tractor. My daughter wasn't with him. He didn't look at me. He told the movers to start with the upstairs and asked me where the keys were, and I handed them over without a word. And I watched him drop them into his jacket pocket like he'd been waiting his whole small life to feel a set of my keys land in his hand. "You don't have to be like this," he said finally. "She's doing you a favor. That place is too much house for one old man." "You're probably right," I said. He blinked. He'd expected a fight, and the lack of one rattled him more than any yelling could have. I picked up my last box, walked down the porch steps for what they thought was the last time, got in my truck, and drove off Cedar Spit Road with the Lake Gould in the rearview mirror. I made it about 2 miles before I had to pull over, and I sat in a turnout with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I let myself grieve for exactly 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face and drove to the Larkspur Motel out on the highway and paid cash for a room with a bed that sloped toward the wall and a heater that tipped. Now, here's where it would have been easy to just wait. But I'm a builder. I don't like a plan I can't see all the way through. And there was one thing I needed to know before I let the trap close. I needed to hear, with my own ears, exactly what they thought of me. Not because it would change anything, because I wanted to be standing on solid ground when the floor fell out from under them. And the only thing that would feel like solid ground was the truth. I called an old friend, a man named Lowell who run the bait shop on the lake for 40 years and knew everybody and everything that moved in that town. I asked him a simple question. Were my daughter and her husband celebrating anywhere tonight? He laughed. Abel, they've got the whole back room at the Copper Kettle booked. Half the people they owe money to are going to be there drinking their wine. The Copper Kettle was the nice place up in the resort village, the one with the patio that looked out over the marina. I didn't go in. I'm not a fool. I parked Lowell's beat-up Bronco. He lent it to me without asking why, which is the measure of a real friend, across the lot where I could see the patio. And I sat low in the seat in a ball cap and a fishing jacket, just another old man waiting on somebody. Invisible, the way men my age become invisible everywhere we go. I didn't need fancy equipment. The patio doors were open to the summer evening, and my daughter has never in her life been quiet when she's happy. I cracked the window, and the voices drifted across the lot clear as anything. She was glowing. Glass of something pale in her hand, in a dress I knew she couldn't afford a week ago. My son-in-law was holding court at the head of the table, and I watched a man I recognized, a guy who'd been chasing him for a loan since spring, slap him on the back and ask how he'd finally gotten the old man to fold. Bald? My son-in-law laughed, and the sound of it went into me like a splinter. There was nothing to fold. We told him it was happening, and he packed his little boxes like a good boy. Honestly, I expected more fight out of him. Guy built half this town, and he couldn't even keep his own house. And then my daughter, who I taught to float, lifted her glass and said the thing I will hear in the dark for the rest of my life. "To Dad," she said, "for finally being useful." The table laughed. They clinked their glasses. And out in the dark, in a borrowed Bronco, an old man sat very still and felt the last warm thing in his chest go cold and quiet and clean. I drove back to the motel. I didn't cry that time. I'd done my crying in the turnout. I lay on that sloping bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, and I made my peace with what was coming. Because there is a particular kind of calm that arrives when grief finishes burning and leaves nothing behind but resolve. The closing went through Friday afternoon. I learned that later. The buyer was an outfit called Driscoll Development, the kind that buys lakefront, tears down whatever's standing, and puts up something with more bathrooms than a person could use in a lifetime. They paid my daughter $5.4 million in the fast cash deal, below what the place was worth, because she wanted out quick and they smelled it. The wire cleared Saturday, and here is the part that mattered. They used the discount title service my son-in-law found online, the kind that runs a thin search and ensures around the gaps, because the buyer was in a hurry to break ground and nobody at that table wanted any rocks turned over. They never found the reverter, where they found it and waved it through, because the policy was cheap and the closing was fat. Either way, the trap I'd set 12 years earlier was now armed, and 3 people had walked right into the jaws of it, smiling. On Sunday night, my daughter and my son-in-law flew out of the regional airport to start their new life in Costa Rica. A villa with a pool, I heard. In a town where the bills come in a currency they figured nobody could chase them across. They posted pictures of their boarding passes. They toasted again, somewhere over the Gulf, to a future they thought they'd bought. While they were in the air, I was in Maitland's office with the lights on after hours, watching him sign the affidavit of reverter, the document declaring that title to the lodge, and the 4 acres under it had reverted to Ridgeline at the moment of my removal. First thing Monday morning, the county recorder's office opened, and Maitland was the first man through the door. By 8:15, it was official, stamped and filed and indexed. The property my daughter had sold for $5.4 million 2 days earlier had never been hers to sell. Driscoll Development sent their bulldozers Monday at 8. I know because Lowell called me from the bait shop, half choking on his coffee, to tell me there were 3 pieces of heavy equipment idling on Cedar Spit Road and a man in a hard hat arguing into a phone. I drove out. I'm not too proud to say I wanted to see it. By the time I got there, it was a circus. The foreman couldn't break ground because his own company's lawyer had called him off. Somebody at Driscoll had finally run a clean title check before sinking a blade into the dirt, the way they should have done before they ever wired $1. And what they'd found had turned the whole project to ash. There was a sheriff's deputy there too. A young one named Cruces, looking confused about who exactly he was supposed to be protecting from whom. I parked the truck and got out, and the developer's representative, a tense man named Pell, the one who'd been on the phone, came striding over with a face like a thundercloud, demanding to know who I was. My name's Abel Hargrove, I said. I own this land. This land, he said, was purchased by my company on Friday for $5.4 million. No, I said, and I handed him the copy Maitland had given me, still warm from the recorder's stamp. You paid $5.4 million to a woman who didn't own it. As of this morning, the title's reverted to me. It reverted, technically, the minute she put me out on Friday. You bought a deed she had no right to sell. I watched him read it. I watched the color leave his face the way it leaves a man's face when a number that big stops being an asset and starts being a whole. He didn't yell. Men who deal in real numbers don't yell. He just looked at the paper, and then at the lodge, and then at me, and he understood the whole shape of it at once. Where is she? He said quietly. Costa Rica, I told him. But I expect she'll be coming home. She did. It took 11 days. Driscoll Development didn't sue me. There was nothing to sue me for. I'd done nothing but record a deed I'd written 12 years prior and let 3 greedy people run straight into it. They went after my daughter and my son-in-law with everything a corporation with that kind of money brings. Civil suit for the full $5.4 million plus damages. And because selling property you know you don't own clear title to, and accepting wire payment for it, isn't just a bad business decision but a crime. The district attorney's office opened a fraud case. A warrant followed. And it's a hard thing to enjoy your villa and your pool when your face is on a notice and your accounts are frozen and the only way back into your own country runs through a courtroom. My son-in-law tried to run further. My daughter, to whatever small credit is left to her, came home and faced it. She called me first. From the airport. I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end wasn't the cold drive-through voice from that Thursday morning. It was small, and it was shaking, and it was the voice of my little girl. And I hated how much I still loved the sound of it. "Dad," she said. "Dad, please. They're saying I could go to prison. They're saying I owe. Dad, I don't have it. The money's gone. Half of it's gone already. Todd spent it. She started to cry. "You did this. You set this up. Your own daughter. How could you do this to your own daughter?" I sat in my new place. A small cabin Lowell helped me find on the quiet end of the lake. Nothing fancy, but mine. And I let her cry. And when she was done, I said the only true thing I had left to say. "I didn't do this to you," I told her. "I wrote the truth down 12 years ago, and you spent 12 years not bothering to read it. You sold my home out from under me and toasted to me being useful. I heard you. I was in the parking lot at the Copper Kettle, and I heard every word." She went silent. "I didn't take anything from you that was yours. I just stopped giving you things that weren't." I could have piled on. Maitland told me Ridgeline could file its own civil suit, on top of Driscoll's for the unauthorized sale and for the eviction itself. We could have buried her so deep she'd never have seen daylight as a free woman again. He had the papers drawn up and waiting. I told him not to file them. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Abel, they tried to steal everything you have." "I know," I said. "But I've got the land back. I've got my home. Let Driscoll get their money. Let the court do what courts do. I don't need to be the one holding the knife at the end of it. I spent 30 years protecting that girl from every consequence she ever earned, and that protection is exactly what made her capable of this. The kindest thing I can do now, the last fatherly thing, is finally let her feel the weight of something she can't make me carry for her. It was not mercy because she deserved it. Let me be clear about that. It was mercy because I deserved to walk away clean, and a man who keeps swinging after the fight is over isn't strong. He's just bleeding out slower than the other guy. They took the villa. The civil judgment will follow them the rest of their lives. My son-in-law is facing charges I don't keep track of anymore. My daughter pleaded down to something that kept her out of prison, but not out of the long gray years of paying back money she no longer has. I don't speak to her. She sends a card at Christmas. I read it and I put it in a drawer. I rebuilt the dock at the new cabin last spring. Smaller than the old one, but it does the job. My grandson, who had nothing to do with any of it, who was as blindsided as I was, comes out some mornings now, and we take a thermos and a couple of rods out before the fog burns off, and we don't talk much, which is the best kind of talking there is. He asked me once if I was sorry about how it all went. I told him no. Then I told him the only thing I really need anyone to take from this. Blood doesn't make somebody family. Showing up does. Keeping your word does. I spent the best years of my life believing that if I just gave enough, loved enough, paid enough, my daughter would one day love me back the way I loved her. But you cannot buy what has to be freely given, and every dollar I handed over to keep her close just taught her that I was a thing to be drawn from, not a man to be loved. So if you're an old man or an old woman listening to this in a quiet house, wondering why the people you bled for only call when the account runs low, hear me. Your love is not a debt you owe them. Your dignity is not a down payment on their affection. You can rebuild a fortune. You can rebuild a house. You can even rebuild a dock with your own two shaking hands at 68 years old. The one thing you cannot rebuild, once you've handed it away to people who never plan to give it back, is your own self-respect. I gave mine away for 12 years. It took losing everything to learn how to take it back. If you've ever had to let someone you love face the truth so that you could finally face yourself, tell me your story down in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, protect your peace, read the fine print. and never apologize for finally standing on your own ground. For 12 years, I told myself that loving my daughter meant giving until there was nothing left in my hands, and Wolfback Lake finally taught me how badly I had that backward. The deed I wrote the week after Adela's funeral didn't ruin her. Her own choices did that. Every check I signed to keep her close, every consequence I swallowed so she'd never have to taste one, piled up quietly like silt in a channel until the morning she stood on that patio with the copper kettle and raised a glass to me being useful. I helped build that moment with my own 2 hands, as surely as I built the dock she learned to swim off of. Kindness with no limits doesn't raise good people. It raises people who believe the bill never comes due, and then hands them the shock of their lives when it finally does. What carried me through wasn't rage. Rage is loud and dumb, and it would have had me screaming in a doorway while the movers carried out my wife's chair. What carried me was sitting still long enough to think clearly when everything in me wanted to react. I'd spent a lifetime learning land, learning paper, learning that every promise gets tested by a document eventually, and I trusted that hard-won knowledge instead of my panic. Foresight isn't magic. It's just refusing to be lazy about the truth, writing it down plainly 12 years early, and being willing to read the fine print. Other people are too proud to read. But the part I'm quietest about is the part I'm proudest of. When Maitland laid the second lawsuit in front of me, the one that could have buried my daughter for good, I told him no. Not because she'd earned mercy, because I'd earned the right to walk away with clean hands, and a man who keeps swinging after the fight isn't strong. He's just slow to stop bleeding. Doing the right thing when you hold all the cards is harder than doing it when you hold none. And then I rebuilt. 68 years old, hands that still shake some mornings, and I framed a new dock board by board on the quiet end of the lake. Smaller, plainer, mine. That's the thing nobody can take from you and nobody can buy. You can lose the house, the money, even the daughter you taught to float, but the will to get up the next morning and build something honest on whatever ground is left to you that you keep. I gave away my self-respect for 12 years to people who never meant to return it, and it took losing everything to learn how to earn it back myself.